Hello, Mason. How's my little pal? Like I said yesterday, today we're going to read the tale of the Mandarin ducks. And I was looking at the background yesterday and saw I could do something here. We've got your mom, she's going to listen, and your grandma. So, the tale of the Mandarin ducks by Catherine Patterson, illustrated by Leo and Diane Dillon. This has got some really nice pictures in it. It's a nice love story. Okay. Long ago and far away in the land of the rising sun, there lived together a pair of Mandarin ducks. Now the drake was a magnificent bird, with plumage of colors so rich that the emperor himself would have envied it. But his mate, the duck, wore the quiet tones of the wood, blending exactly with the hole in a tree where the two had made their nest. One day, while the duck was sitting on her eggs, the drake flew down to a nearby pond to search for food. And while he was there, a hunting party entered the woods. The hunters were led by the lord of the district, a proud and cruel man who believed that everything in the district belonged to him to do with as he wished. The lord was always looking for beautiful things to adorn his manor house and garden. And when he saw the drake swimming gracefully on the surface of the pond, he determined to capture him for his own. The Lord's chief steward, a man named Shozo, tried to discourage his master. "The drake is a wild spirit, my lord," he said. "Surely he will die in captivity." But the Lord pretended not to hear Shozo. Secretly he despised Shozo, because although Shozo had once been his mightiest samurai, the warrior had lost an eye in battle and was no longer handsome to look upon. The Lord ordered his servants to clear a narrow way through the undergrowth and place acorns along the path. And when the drake came out of the water, he saw the acorns. How pleased he was! And he forgot to be cautious, thinking only of what a feast it would be to take home to his mate. And just as he was bending to pick up an acorn in his scarlet beak, a net fell over him, and the frightened bird was carried back to the Lord's manor and placed in a small bamboo cage. Poor little fellow. Well, the Lord was delighted with his new pet. He ordered a feast to be prepared and invited all the wealthy landowners from miles around so that he could show off the drake and brag about his wonderful plumage, which was indeed more beautiful than the finest brocade. But the drake could think only of his mate, sitting alone on her eggs, not knowing what had happened to her husband. And as the days wore on, his crested head began to droop. His lovely feathers lost their luster. His proud, wild cry became first a weary croak, and then he fell silent. No matter what delicacies the kitchen maid brought him, he refused to eat. Oh, he is grieving for his mate, the girl thought, for she was wise in the customs of wild creatures. The Lord, who liked things only so long as they were beautiful and brought him honor, grew angry when he saw that the drake was ailing. Perhaps we should let him go," Shozo suggested, "since he no longer pleases you, my lord." But the Lord did not like anyone to tell him what to do. much less a one-eyed servant. He refused to release the drake, ordering instead that the cage be put out of sight so that he would no longer be annoyed by the bird's sad appearance. What a mean old lord. When Yasuko, for this was the kitchen maid's name, saw that the drake had been cast aside and his cage relegated to the far corner of the kitchen garden, she determined to save his life. And one night, when there was no moon, she crept into the garden, and without a sound she opened the door of the cage and gently lifted out the drake. Since he was now too weak to fly, she carried him to the edge of the woods and put him on the ground. The drake shook himself once, turned about as though he were bowing to her, and quickly blended into the darkness. Well, in a great house there are always those who delight in causing mischief. And so it was that by mid-morning the news of the drake's disappearance had reached the ears of the Lord. Now, even though the master no longer desired the drake, he was furious at the thought that someone should take what he considered his own. He immediately called for Shozo. "Why have you stolen my drake?" he demanded. Shozo simply bowed his head. He would say nothing in his own defense, for although he had not done so, he had often wanted to release the drake, and in his mind desiring to unlatch the cage and actually lifting the latch were one and the same. The Lord ordered that Shozo be beaten and stripped of his rank in the household. And although Shozo had once been a brave samurai, second only to the Lord himself, he was now forced to haul the waste and scrub the toilets. When Yasuko saw how he had been humiliated, she told Shozo what she had done and begged him to let her confess. Shozo forbade her to tell anyone. Why should two suffer for one crime, he asked. But he took great comfort in her concern. And they're starting to like one another. And as the days passed, Yasuko and Shozo came to love each other. And this love shone so radiantly that finally they could no longer keep it hidden. And eventually the mischief maker told the Lord of their love. The mischief maker. And Yasuko and Shozo were called into his presence. "Well, it is apparent to me," he said, "that the two of you conspired to rob me of my beautiful drake. Until now I have been merciful, but you have taken advantage of my good nature. Therefore, I must make an example of you to all who would resist my will. You are hereby sentenced to banishment." That means to be sent away. And since the Lord's word was law, there was no way to oppose him. He called to his retainers and had the criminals bound and prepared to march them out of the city. But just as they were about to set out, two messengers arrived at the gate, and it was quite obvious from their rich dress that the messengers were persons of great importance. "We have been sent by the emperor," they told the Lord. "His divine majesty has had a vision of the merciful Buddha, who ordered him to abolish banishment as a punishment throughout the empire. Therefore, if there was anyone in your district under this sentence, you are directed to send him at once to the imperial court. The Lord was very angry at this order, angry enough to kill the messengers who had brought it. But he knew he had no choice. He commanded his retainers to march the condemned couple to the capital. Now it was a long march, a 5-day journey in fact, and as the days wore on, Yasuko and Shozo became very, very tired and began to lag behind the retainers. At the end of the 3rd day, in the midst of a deep woods, the unhappy pair were so tired they could not walk another step. The impatient guards yelled at them, hurry up, and kept up a rapid pace. Well, the truth of the matter was that the retainers, who seemed so brave, were indeed frightened by the dark woods. And as night fell and the darkness deepened, Yasuko and Shozo could hardly see one straw sandal step ahead of the other. And before long they realized that the guards had left them behind. They were alone, without food or drink, in the middle of the cold, dark forest. They tried to stumble on through the blackness, but soon lost the path. Ah, cried Yasuko, see what I have done. If it were not for my foolishness, we would be back at the manor, safe and warm. Hush, said Shozo. It is not foolish to show compassion for a fellow creature. Besides, what danger of the forest could match the cruelty of our former master? I wish my hands were not bound behind me, Yasuko said. I don't think I would be afraid if I could take hold of your hand. Come here, Shozo said. Stand as close as you can so that your shoulder is touching mine, and then we will not lose each other in the darkness. At that moment they heard a rustling sound. The two stood still as pillars of stone, trying not to be frightened. Ah, said a kind voice, we have found you. Don't be afraid. We will take you to a place where you can rest. Who are you that speaks to us? Shozo asked. He could not keep his voice from trembling. We are the imperial messengers, replied another, whose form was also hidden by the impenetrable night. Yasuko and Shozo knew that they must obey, but they still couldn't help being a little frightened. They could see nothing in the blackness, and the rustle of the messengers' silk garments made a ghostly sound as they walked ahead. Finally, the 4 of them came to a tiny clearing in the forest, and there in the moonlight stood a hut made of wood and grass. The messengers took Yasuko and Shozo inside. First they lit a lamp, and then they untied the ropes that bound them. Gently the messengers massaged the servants' wrists. Each of them was allowed a long soak in a great wooden bathtub, filled with clean, hot water. When at last Yasuko and Shozo were dressed in fresh kimonos, a wonderful feast was set before them. The 2 servants ate gratefully, too tired to wonder how the messengers had come upon such delicious food in the middle of a forest. After they had finished eating, pallets and quilts were laid out for them on the tatami floor, and they fell fast asleep at once, holding hands. In the morning, Yasuko and Shozo were awakened by the delicious smell of rice steaming and bean soup bubbling in an iron pot. But the messengers were nowhere to be seen. Oh, we fail to thank them for all their kindness, Yasuko said, and they jumped up and ran to the door of the hut. And there, on the path, were a pair of Mandarin ducks. The drake wore plumage so rich and colorful that the emperor himself might have envied it, while his mate were the quiet tones of the wood. The pair turned and seemed to bow, and then, lifting themselves into the air, they flew straight and swift as arrows fly above the highest trees of the forest. I'm thinking maybe the Mandarin ducks were the messengers. Yasuko and Shozo lived on for many years in their hut of wooden grass. They had many children who gave them much happiness and a little trouble. But as they had learned years before, trouble can always be borne more easily when it is shared. And there's old Grandma and Papa and all their children and grandchildren. That's the end. That's a nice story. I like that story. And a preview of tomorrow. Rudyard Kipling's Just So stories. I think we'll read How the Leopard Got His Spots. I'll see you tomorrow, Mace. Take care.